Hello， 大家好，我这边是乐手巢的 John。我们刚刚访问了一个在吉他界非常大咖、超级大咖、数一数二大的哦。你要说是现代的吉他之神之一，也绝对不夸张。我们刚刚访问了 Steve Vai， 然后我现在人还在抖。那就废话不多说，直接进入影片吧。
Hello, my Taiwanese fans. This is Steve Vai, and I'm so looking forward to coming to Taiwan and playing for you. Thank you for the support.
Okay, so a lot of us at YSL Life, besides being music lovers, we play the guitar as well, mostly guitar. And so we are gear nerds ourselves. So there will be a lot of questions based on gear.
Okay.
So the first question, which is you having the Jam for so long, right? It's been close to 40 years now, I believe.
Yeah, close to 40 years. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then so you released the Pia several years ago. And so we'd like to ask, what's kind of kindled your thought to releasing the Pia after, having a Gem for so long?
Well, it's just part of the creative spirit, the Gem. When I designed the Gem, I really designed it for my style of playing at the time. I kind of was feeling there were certain things about conventional guitars that had certain limits based on what I was wanting to do. Like for instance, at the time, a 24 fret with humbuckers and a Strat style was very rare. I wanted a good cutaway. I could never understand why guitars were made so you get frets, but you can't really reach them. And I wanted a particular pickup configuration, because I like the sound of the double coil, the humbuckers, in the treble position and the neck position, because that sounded very rock and roll to me, But the single coil, when you have two single coils, I really like that sound. It's a kind of tubey Strat kind of a sound. So we devised this switcher selector that when you're in this position, you get the full-on humbucker. But when you're in this position, the second one, it splits the coil in the humbucker and gives you two single coils. And that's that tubey kind of a Strat sound that I like. And I use this position quite a bit. This position gives you just the middle single coil. But I was very rarely using it. Actually, I never really used it. So Doug MacArthur, my guitar tech, wired this so that it splits the coil on these two pickups. So you get two single coils with the humbuckers. And then in this position, it splits the coil. So you get the two single coil. And then this is your, full out humbucker. Yeah. But also the tremolo system. No tremolo system at that time was really floating. You had Strats. So most guitars back then, you might be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to really, but there wasn't anything that could do that. And then I just looked at what was stopping the tailpiece, and it was just this wood here. So I just chopped it out. And once I did that, the bar would be able to rise. And also I chopped it out here. So you can, that achieved something that I really wanted, but no other guitar could really do. I didn't have any expectations on the guitar being interesting to anybody else. I didn't have a deal with anybody. I just had 4 guitars made that were basically gems. And then once I was doing very well with the Dave Roth band, the various guitar companies were interested in having me endorse them. But I didn't really want to because I had my guitar. The idea of having a company behind you that could make the guitars and customize them and do special things was very appealing to me. So I sent out the design to a lot of companies that were interested, and none of them made the guitar that I wanted, except for Ibanez. Ibanez, in 3 weeks, they made a perfect Gem. Wow. And I was just stunned, and I was so appreciative and grateful because now I had the power of this fantastic company to make the guitar that I liked. And then they asked if I'd be interested in making it available as a signature model. And I thought, well, sure, but I don't know who's going to like it. It's got a handle in it, and it's got, but luckily I was wrong. A lot of people liked it, and it's gone on to be the most successful signature series guitar and the longest running. Well, actually, the longest running is George Benson, because he signed the deal with Ibanez a few months before me. I was so fortunate because Ibanez Hoshino had such creative people, and they were very supportive of the artists. So they were very eager to work with me to create all of the different variations of the gem. And through the years, I just never really had a desire to play another guitar. Of course, I have Strats, I have Les Paul, I have a lot of different guitars, and I play them occasionally for texture and a recording. But the gem is just built for me. It's like, it feels like home. But 35 years, I just started to feel like I want to do something a little different, just a little different, you know? And I work very closely with Ibanez, and I don't have a Pia with me. Well, I have the Pia. And we just started thinking, you know, let's do something different. So the first thing was the cutaway. I wanted something, and if you have a Pia, you can see those beautiful teardrop cutaways. You'd be surprised how long that took to design because it had a look and feel just right. So the position of those little teardrop cutaways, it took me like a year to change it a little bit and then change it again and change it. I was driving Ibanez crazy, you know. But finally, we got it just right. And there was a couple of other things that I wanted to do. Like the gem has very sort of hard edges.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of like that. It's got a rock and roll, but I wanted to smooth that out a bit. So the Pia's got a little bit smoother edges. And we changed a couple of little things on it, but nothing really big. To me, it feels like a gem. So they work great, and I can use them interchangeably.
So the shape, like you mentioned, it's a little bit more curved. And I would say it's slightly modernized because, again, after 35 years, an old guitar. But, you know, stuff changes, right? Music changes. Yeah, so I also realized that, you know, it's using the stainless steel frets and as well as luminaires, which are sort of the newer things.
Yeah, because technology changes, and that includes guitar design. So there's different elements that we can bring into the mix that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, luminaire, I would say, is a very useful invention in the guitar world.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, after your Pia guitar, the next big thing that shook the world would be the Hydra. Yeah, so we're interested to know, you know, how did you come up with the idea of the Hydra? And, you know, or how many design iterations that you have? And, you know, what kind of trouble did Ibanez encounter?
The guys at Ibanez in Japan were just so fantastic. They're young, they're eager, they're really smart, and they're very creative. So the idea for the Hydra, it started basically the first time I saw Jimmy Page with a double neck when I was 10 years old, you know. I just loved the idea of double neck guitar, multi-necks. The first guitar that I bought with my own money, washing dishes and delivering newspapers, was a double neck. It was a Ventura double neck, which was an Ibanez, really. I just loved it. It was so fascinating. That was the guitar I actually made my biggest breakthroughs on. And then through the years, I had the great opportunity to experiment with all sorts of crazy double necks, triple necks. You know, I had the Hart guitar. When I designed the Hart guitar, it was really a prop for a David Lee Roth video. But I started to feel a little guilty that I wasn't really playing it, you know, because I can't really do this. You know, like Michelangelo Badio, that he really can play. That's hard. You know, I never really worked. I could do it a little bit, but it was more for show. So I started to feel a little guilty. And I wanted to make a song with that Hart guitar that used all the necks properly, you know? So I wrote a song called Fever Dream. And then I still wasn't quite satisfied. I knew there was another desire. So about 7 years ago, the idea for the Hydra came. And it came all in one moment, you know? It was like a download in my brain. And if I was to try to explain what that sounded like in my head, I would say, okay, I want to create an instrument that'll carry an entire piece of music. This one instrument could do it all. So I knew I needed a bass neck, 7-string neck, and I knew I was going to tune it down to drop A, 12-string for texture, and the harp strings, more texture. And I wanted it to be very technical. So I wanted a guitar synthesizer. I wanted piezo's and sustainers and sample and hold features. So I started to write an email to Ibanez, and it took me about 10 minutes. I said, I'm thinking of a guitar that has da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. But in this download that I had, I also knew that I wanted to write a song and I could see myself in my mind. I could see it doing this kind of thing, interweaving a melody while retaining some kind of a structure that supported the song. And I knew first and foremost that it had to have a good melody, because if you don't have a good melody, you're just kind of like experimenting with your intellect. And I wanted it to be a good song. And I didn't know what that was going to be, but I could see, I knew that it was like a Rubik's Cube that I wanted to work a melody into this movement, and I wanted it to be seamless, elegant, free-flowing. So you have to imagine it first, So because I didn't know what it was going to look like, I never sent the email. And I was waiting for some inspiration on what it might look like. And maybe like a year or 2 years later, that inspiration came, and I was watching a Mad Max movie. Those like Thunderdome. And there was this one scene where they're driving through the desert. I think they're driving through the desert in every scene. But there's this guy playing this crazy guitar, and it's got flames shooting out of it. And I saw that and I said, that's it. I'm going to make that real. And it was a steampunk fashion. Steampunk is a very interesting mix of old antique with new sort of gears and interesting metal. So I went online and I found some examples of steampunk fashion, and I put it in that email and I hit send. And as soon as they got that email in Japan, they just jumped right on it. And these guys were so fantastic. The first thing they started to do was send some illustrations, some photo ideas of what it might look like. And I couldn't believe it. They did such a good job. So the look of the Hydra really came, it was me telling them I want something steampunk that's got all these features. And they created the illustrations. There was things that I liked and things we could improve. So we went back and forth on the illustrations for quite some time. I mean, it was maybe a year, Finally, it got to the point, because there was no rush on anything. It was like a pet project, It was just like something that was there. So then at one point then, they came to my home with a cardboard cutout of the Hydra. After we settled on what it was probably going to look like. And the cardboard cutout was helpful because I could kind of see practically what it was going to feel like and look like, and we changed a couple of things. So then a lot of time passed again, and they made a prototype. And I actually have the prototype of the Hydra. I call it the hyena. It's really quite ugly, and it's not finished or anything. It was just something that we could use to see how it was going to feel, because I knew I was going to have to write a piece of music on it, and I was going to have to play it. And I knew I didn't want to just like play on this neck and then play on that neck and then play on this neck. I wanted it all integrated, So the prototype helped me to see what some of the real challenges were going to be. So for instance, the necks on the bass and the 12 string, they were a little too close, so they had to expand a little bit because it would just get in the way. And the harp strings were way closer to the necks, and it was really a problem because I would try to play and I'd keep hitting them, And the bass neck was just way too big. It had to be a 3/4 inch bass neck. It's not a full length, or else it would like extend way past the other necks. So once we settled on tweaking the prototype, a lot of time passed, and finally the Hydra showed up at my house. I opened the case and I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. It was so weird and beautiful and crazy, It was just crazy. So I thought, I really have to write. I got scared for a minute. So what have I done?
What have you created?
What have I created? How am I going to play this thing, But I still had the vision in my mind. So I put the Hydra on a stand, and it sat in the studio for about a year and a half. And every time I'd pass it, it would like growl at me. It's like, oh, you got to write a song on me. Don't forget, And I was just waiting for the right time, because the right time comes at the right time, and it. And I couldn't push it. And everything fell into place perfect, because we went into lockdown. And I started to work on Violet. I basically finished the record. I knew I had to focus on the Hydra, but it was a real challenge, because I had to break 50 years of conditioning, because when you play, you hit a note and your finger goes like that or whatever. But with the Hydra, I had to figure out how to create that rhythm pattern and all the other parts without disrupting the melody. It had to sound like, it had to be a good melody. And I didn't want the melody to be disrupted because of a weird instrument. You know what I mean? I didn't want it to sound limited. I wanted it to sound and look unlimited. And then I remember the day that I got behind the Hydra for the first time, and I carved out 6 weeks to work on this. And they were probably about 15-hour undisturbed days. And I remember getting behind the Hydra and for a moment thinking, what have I done? I don't have the dexterity. I don't have the independence, to do this. And that thought lasted about 10 seconds. Then the other little voice came in and said, shut up and just do it. You got this. You've already seen it in your mind. If you see it in your mind, you can do it. And I said, okay, all right, here I go. And I just started very slow, and it was so much fun, it was so great. That's the one thing that I love most about what I do is, like any musician, any artist, it's coming up with an idea and then feeling it up, following it through and making mistakes, making corrections, and finding things that don't work and finding things that work. So doing the Hydra, it was like a Rubik's Cube. And every time I get the colors to come together, like I get a melody to work, it was like pure joy. It's like I would throw a party in my head. And I just kept working on it and working on it. I recorded it in sections. I did the intro, and then it took weeks to write the verse, and get it to work smoothly. And then finally, when it was done, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this sounds pretty good, and it really worked. So we released In Violet, and photos of the Hydra started to come out because it's on the cover. And, you got to be very careful that you don't placate the audience. And what I mean by that is it was very easy for people to think, oh, yeah, sure, it's Steve Vai. He can make any guitar that he wants. Ibanez will make anything that he wants in his crazy mind. But what is he going to do with it? So I knew I had to do something. So I started doing press. People would say, oh, the song Teeth of the Hydra, you used the Hydra for that. And I'd say, yeah, that everything is being performed on the Hydra. And they'd say, oh, cool. And I'd say, no, everything at the same time. And they go, oh, cool. And then I had some little video clips of when I was working it out, and I'd show it to them, and they'd go, oh, I see. So I knew that I needed to make a video because the real entertainment value is in watching watching the performance of it. So the hard part was standing up and playing the Hydra, because I had it on a stand, and I had to work another 6 weeks to be able to stand up and have the stamina, because it's very heavy. It feels good when you play it. I could play it better when it's strapped on. And we have a waist strap. But the problem with that is, with the waist strap, it's nice because you don't have any weight on your shoulders. It's all on your waist and your legs. So, but the problem with that is it doesn't move like a regular guitar. Like, with a guitar, you go like this. And if you go like that and you're holding the Hydra on a waist strap, it'll take you right out. It'll take you all the way across the room, And you can't really go like this, So it took a while to build up the stamina in my legs to be able to stand there and play it for a whole song, the whole thing. But shooting a video is very different. You got to do it all day long. So I worked on it until I could play the song virtually perfectly standing up with the waist strap, but it was very precarious. If you notice in the video, I'm not moving much because it was just hard for me to really move. And that day that we shot the video, I played the song in loop over and over and over for 10 hours. And I couldn't walk for 2 days after that. And also, I was having problems with my shoulder. I had surgery like 6 months before that. Well, I had torn tendons or something, you know, but I didn't want to get the surgery because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to play the Hydra after the surgery. So I wanted to shoot the video. So I shot the video, and then 2 days after the video shoot, I went in and had surgery. And I was right. I couldn't play the Hydra after that because the Hydra, you got to do all this stuff, you know. I couldn't even do that, you know. So I postponed my American tour, and we went out on the first European tour, and I couldn't take the Hydra because I just couldn't play it. But then after that, we did another American tour. I had healed pretty good, and I decided to play the Hydra on the stand. So when we performed the song live, I used the stand because it's too risky. So that's the story of the Hydra. And the song, Teeth of the Hydra, well, when I opened the case for the first time and I saw the Hydra, that's when I named it the Hydra, because it's a mythical Greek mythology dragon-like creature with 3 heads. And I was a big fan of those old sort of 70s claymation movies like Clash of the Titans and Jason and the Argonauts. And that's where the title came from for me, is from that movie Jason and the Argonauts. And there's one scene where Jason goes into the cave and he has to battle the Hydra. He beats the Hydra, and then the bad guy comes along and he takes the teeth of the Hydra and he plants them in the ground, and they turn into the children of the Hydra, which are these very nefarious looking skeletons that chase Jason and the guys. So when I looked at the Hydra after I named it, I thought, what's the name of the song? And immediately it was Teeth of the Hydra. So when I went to write the song, this was a situation where I had the song title first. And I thought, what would a song sound like that was called Teeth of the Hydra and is written on that guitar? And that's how it came about. You know, that melody that in the beginning, that melody is very sultry and very mysterious. And that's like when Jason is going into the cave of the Hydra. And so this is kind of like what goes on in the mind of a songwriter. I have other ideas that are starting to form for another piece of music for the Hydra. And it's very, very different, very different. See, in Teeth of the Hydra, it's very linear. You know, it's like this. But what I'm seeing now is something different. It's like, you know, more multiple necks and things that are will require a lot of independence.
You know, we'll be looking forward to that. Because we were interested to find out, you know, whether the idea of the song came first, then became the idea for the guitar, or, well, now it turns out it was kind of the other way around. So, you know, the song actually came after you received the guitar and you kind of worked a song out of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, on that aspect, so when you're creating a new piece of music, does it usually come with, let's say, a specific tone with, like, you know, I want this with distortion, I want this with flanger, that kind of thing? Or that's something that you do after you've gone into studio?
Well, it can happen many different ways, but for the most part, the energy of a song dictates the kind of tone. And when I write a song, you feel the energy that you want first. And that kind of tells you what the foundation of the tone might be. So if you take something like Avalancha or Zeus and Chains from the new record in Violet, I knew that I wanted my kind of normal, big, heavy tone. Now, adding effects and stuff, that might come in the mind first, but a lot of times that comes later when you're kind of fooling around and pushing buttons and seeing how it fills the frequencies. And sometimes I can find myself writing a song based on a particular effect.
Yeah, and you know, over the span of your career, right, it's been a lengthy one, a healthy and lengthy one. And you know, you've gone through many different types of equipments. Well, guitars have mostly stayed the same, but you know, amp-wise, you've gone through different ones. For example, you're now mainly using the Synergy stuff. right, with your signature, module and stuff. But when it comes to performing your older catalog, right, with new gear, right, does it give you like new sparks? Like a new inspiration?
Well, guitar amplification has not really changed very much. People make different amps and tone colors can change, but rock and roll, distorted rock and roll is rock and roll, and it hasn't changed much. So when it comes time for me to play, if I was going to play the Attitude song or an older song, it's all there. And the synergy is really nice because they're modules, and the modules actually are blueprints of the original technology for the preamps of various amplifiers. And it's the real blueprints because they license it from the companies. So if you have a Soldano Synergy module, the preamp section basically of a Soldano or Friedman or Diesel, the legacy style. You have these modules and then they all come out and go through one power amp. So you have amazing amounts of options. So when I tour, I'm using 4 different Synergy modules. I have 2 of the Vai modules, and they're set differently for different songs. But then I have like a Bassman type and a Plexi. And if you hit those, it's a Plexi and it's a Bassman, basically. I can go back to any song in my catalog and get a pretty good replica of what I used.
Would you say that you would try to be as close as the original tone possible, or you would be kind of modernize it a little bit?
Well, modernized is kind of a slippery slope because, like I say, guitar amplifier tone has not really changed so much, But what I might do is drastically change it just to make it different. I may go more clean with a big wide effect for something. Usually I try to get something as close to the original, though.
Right. Yeah, I actually played with the module stuff like way back when it was Randall. Yeah. So I actually really wanted that package. Never got around to it.
Randall ended up, Synergy ended up, from what I understand, they ended up purchasing Randall and taking it further to what is now the Synergy modules.
Yeah, because right now they even, as I mentioned, they are officially licensed from those manufacturers, which was something that they didn't do back in the day. And actually,
it takes a lot of money in R&D to bring something like that together, and it's very common. As a matter of fact, it's always the case that there's a lot of people, a lot of companies that work to create whatever happens. You need everybody because it's everybody standing on the shoulders of everybody else.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of a big discussion also on, let's say, modeling amps, right? There's like, stuff like Axifax and all that. So there are people it's like, it's a very debatable topic. But again, with, people like Synergy, they officially license it. So some people will stand behind it even more. Because the original...
Well, there's a big difference now. But when you're talking about modeling, Synergy modules, they're the same as preamps. They got tubes, and they're, for lack of a better term, they're analog. Modeling is all digital, and there's a big difference in the ear of a person that's used to the tube analog type of a sound. I don't use modeling. I use it in the studio a little bit, but every time I try to use it live, it just doesn't cut. It doesn't stand up. It sounds like a mosquito or something. It just gets smaller. And I know a lot of people use it, and that's fine. I just don't. When you're sitting in a room by yourself and you're playing through all the tons of modeling amps, it can sound really good. It can sound big and it can sound full, and you can get all sorts of different dimensions. You could do a lot more than just with an amplifier. But I've found that when I take that sound to the stage, the stage is like a battlefield of frequencies, and you now the guitar tone is competing with a bass, another guitar player, cymbals, kick drums, the room, the stage, and it just doesn't hold up.
And with the Hydra, it does all that. It has even more frequencies.
Yes, but the Hydra's all analog. There's nothing digital.
Yeah, but instead of competing with the bass, it has a bass.
It has its own bass, yeah.
Yeah, so it has multiple outputs, right? Like individual outputs.
Yeah, the output, that was a real tough one to figure out, but Ibanez figured it out. What it is everything comes out of a Cat 5 cable, or maybe it's Cat 6. Yeah, so all of the necks and the digital, the synthesizer and the MIDI, it all comes out of a Cat 5, and then it goes into, well, not the MIDI is different. But then it goes into, it's the brain. In the video, it's that gold box, that big, heavy gold box. Yeah, so you plug the Cat 5 into that, and then that creates 4 outputs. And you got a mono output for the 7-string, the bass, 12-string, and the harp. So you got 4 mono outputs. And then each one of those outputs goes to a mono input on the axe effects, the fractal 3 axe effect. And that is the only thing that'll work. That thing is like a space station. And once the 4 inputs go in, now you can do anything with them. So what we do is, then there's 4 stereo outputs, 1 for each neck. And what I did with the Hydra, the main 7-string output goes to my rig, like my regular guitar. And then the 12-string, that's a stereo output. And the way that I created the patch for that is that the 12-string is kind of like panned here, and then the effect is panned over here. So it sounds full, but it still has its space in the real estate. And then the bass is up the middle, and the harp strings are panned hard right, but the effects on them are left. So you get this kind of washy cross-phasing, and you can only do that with the fractal, I believe. And the bass, 12-string and harp necks, once they come out of the fractal, they all go direct into the PA and the monitors.
Wow, so the Hydra actually comes packaged with it looks like a rack on the video.
Yeah, and we had to have a couple of those built because that thing is just too heavy to carry around. It's massive and it's delicate. I have that set up in the studio, but live we had a single rack space splitter made.
I would say, again, personally, I'm a guitar player. I've been playing guitar for like 20 something years. And the Gem was actually a guitar that I wanted to pick up as my first guitar, but that was back before I even knew what it was. So like before I even knew who you are, right? I was just like looking, shopping at the guitar store, trying to pick up my first guitar. And it's like, wow, that looks cool because it has the monkey grip, right? Which pretty much no other electric guitar. Yeah, so that was something that, really stood out to me. And I actually have a book for the Fire Garden album. The official music score tabs. I tried to learn some of the songs. I tried, but it was way too advanced for me back then. Yeah, because again, that was still when I was relatively new at playing the guitar. So the only thing I knew was like standard tuning, right? And then there were a lot of different tunings on that album, and it was just way too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I grew up listening to sort of simple rock guitar, sometimes, fusion. But after I released like Passion and Warfare, I started hearing, oh, your guitar parts are too complicated. And I think, really? I don't think they're so complicated. But I see now that for a lot of people, it's a little advanced if you're a beginner.
But, speaking after Passion Warfare, it actually was very I would say influential, but very personal is that, Devin Townsend is one of my favorite vocalists. And on your Sex and Religion album, back when he was still a kid. Yeah, so actually I found out after I was already a fan of Devin Townsend. I was like, wow, he was the vocalist on that album.
Devin was very young at the time and just filled with a lot of spirit, a lot of incredible intensity, and a magnificent voice.
Yes.
I didn't realize at the time, I didn't know how brilliant he was. I just was looking for a great singer, It wasn't until later when he started releasing his solo music that I was like, wow.
And, speaking of other artists that, we know that you've worked with a lot of younger musicians, right? For example, Polyphia, Toast and Abasi, Yvette Young, they are kind of doing their own thing right now, I would say. They kind of define the genre. They're doing something that, again, is kind of new in the guitar music. So, how would you comment on them? How have they influenced you in any way?
Well, it's inspiring to see this new generation, especially guys like Tim and Scotty from Polyphia, because it's bound to happen. I mean, if you can imagine when Chuck Berry was a guitar god, and then Jimmy Page came along. He was doing something new, Jeff Beck, and it doesn't reduce anything that Chuck Berry was doing. It's just an evolution. So that when the 80s came around and you got Edward Van Halen and Yngwie and Satriani and guys like that, they were doing their own new thing. And that's never going to stop. And then now you see these young players, they're doing their own thing. When I see Tosin, it's just stunning. It's beautiful, beautiful. The thing I like about it is not just the development of the technique, but it's with Tosin, there's a real harmonic evolution going on. It doesn't sound melodically or harmonically like so much of the past. You can hear influences and stuff. And, guys like Guthrie Govan, they just take it. That's what they're supposed to do. And it's magnificent. It's inspiring to me because when I was at the top of my game in the 80s and 90s, you always think that, all right, I'm really doing great, And then all of a sudden, there's a whole new evolution. And even back then when I was playing, there was so many guitar players that had a lot more technique than me, but newness is newness, because these kids, I say kids, they grew up in a different world. They don't know the world without the internet or social media or TikTok or, or video games. The development of video games created a different kind of focus in the world for young people. And you can see that now. It's very obvious in the guitar community that there's a freshness, a newness, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I believe the last time you came to Taiwan, which was 6 years ago, that was the Generation X. And you actually played with Tosin on the same stage. Yeah, so I was kind of really blown away because, that was mind-blowing.
Yeah, that was interesting because Tosin's music was so vastly different than anybody else on that stage. All of us had some kind of a commonality, but everybody's music was different. Yngwie was very different than what I do, which is very different than what Zach does. But Tosin was more contemporary, his sound, his technique, and his note choices. So it was probably a little challenging for him to feel comfortable sitting in on playing something like Frankenstein or Highway Star. But he did a great job. Now he's really doing fantastic.
And, kind of over the span of your career, because you went from the days of physical music, like CDs, vinyl records, and now it's, streaming. And, how do you feel has kind of changed in the music world?
Well, it was a huge change for everybody, especially artists. I just feel fortunate and grateful that I was able to go through the period where there was CDs, there was things that you could buy, because that is what helped make the world go round for artists, because you could actually make money on the stuff you were creating. You can still do that, but it's a lot more challenging. A lot of things have changed. The way that you make music has changed, and I think there's a great advantage in everything. And if you don't like the change, you don't have to use it. You can go back to using analog tape or something. But whenever a new technology comes along, I always ask myself, how can this serve me? And how can I serve it? And if you ask that question, you get those answers. But if you say in your mind, this sucks, we're all going to hell in a handbag, the record industry was destroyed, my career is over because I can't make any money selling CDs anymore, well, then that's what you're going to get. But if you look at it like, how can I benefit from this? Then you will. There's these days it's much easier to market yourself and to make music, create it without having to spend a lot of money. So it balances itself out.
Yeah, like I would say promotion is probably a lot easier with, social media, YouTube and all that, because back then, you really only had the record company.
You had the record company. That was your voice to the outside world, and they would govern that. Of course, the most important thing was the quality of the work you're doing. Because if the record companies had something to give to the public that was of great interest, they did, and it worked. But what the record companies didn't do so much was really cultivate and explore esoteric talent, alternative talent. Like, I can't imagine if they saw someone like Polyphia in the 80s or 90s, they would have thought, there's a band that I could make some money with, But because now you can promote yourself, you can do what you want. You're not held to anybody else's governance. So if you have a creative heart and you pour it into your work, you can then put it up online and the right people will be attracted to it. Whereas in the past, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, so again, as you mentioned slightly earlier that, it was 6 years ago that you last came to Taiwan. Was there any, fond memories or, memorable moments back then? And, this time around, what surprises can we expect? Or it won't be a surprise if you tell us now.
Well, there's no real surprises except the Hydra. The Taiwan audience is always quite fantastic. They are such great supporters of guitar music. They're just great audiences. Every audience reacts differently, and Taiwan is no different in that it acts differently. But an audience, to me, it doesn't matter where they're from. They're people that I'm connecting with. And it doesn't matter what country. But the thing I think that has changed in my show is what naturally happens to an artist that continues to love what they do and go deeper. I don't know why, but as long as I can remember, I just love the guitar and I love playing and I love connecting with the notes and I love imagining things and then having it come out. And that was always at the forefront of everything I did. How could I come up with something like In Violet or the Hydra or anything like that if it wasn't constantly interesting? So when that happens, you create different kinds of goals. And the goal that I am creating now, or I have been, it's through my whole career, but I didn't really know it. It's the connection to the notes and the body. I like to move, make funny faces, and I still have in my head the vision of the performer that I created when I was 9 years old. I saw this enigmatic performer playing effortlessly, engaging the audience, lifting them up, connecting, and the whole poetry of the notes and the body language. So through my career, that started to develop, but anything new like that can seem kind of weird. So at times I was heavily criticized for my funny faces or the body language. And there were times where I tried to control that, but not anymore, because that's natural to me.
Yes.
And if you try to compromise what's natural to you, you suffer. You suffer psychologically, and it's unnecessary. You need to own who you are, because that feels the best. You have to recognize when you are allowing yourself to feel pressured to change because of what the outside world deems as normal. You got to find yourself and then express it unconditionally with no excuses. That will always work for you. That's what I work on now more and more, just relaxing into being as organic of a performer as I can be, because I think that gives the most entertainment value. When you're watching a performer, if you're watching a sports athlete, if you're watching an artist, if you're watching anything, you love to see people who are just really connected in a natural way with what they do. That continues to be my goal.
I would say it's kind of saying that, the best music that you will make is when it comes from your heart.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah, because if you're kind of limiting yourself because you were saying, you try to not make those faces, then you're not being the real you. And, then your best ability to make good music probably will be hindered that way.
Yeah. And it's not that you need to be strict about anything too. There's a lot of times where I just sit and play and I'm not making faces. I'm just sitting and playing. But you're absolutely correct. Everybody has a unique voice in them, and finding it and expressing it will always be your greatest joy.
Okay, great. So that is kind of the end of our interview today. So thank you very much. It's really such an honor because, you know, for us guitar players, being able to do an interview with you is just one of the moments. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do like a live rig interview on the day of your performance in Taiwan. We're trying to make it happen. We don't know yet, but, you know, hopefully we'll be able
to do that. It'll probably be with my most excellent guitar tech, Doug MacArthur.
Yeah, so that will also be great because, you know, that way we can probably take a look at the Hydra in person.
Be careful because it bites.
I'll be careful.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you. It's such an honor once again.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.
好，我们刚刚访问完 Steve Vai， 那我觉得这一次的压力应该是目前第2大，第1大应该还是跟 Fender 的，就是 Andy Mooney 跟 Everco。对，那 Steve Vai， 拜托 Steve Vai，Steve Vai， 你怎么可能不紧张，压力不大？对，那其实比我想象中久。对，那因为原本觉得说应该可能30-40分钟可以搞定，
怕他太忙，所以想说快。
对，然后因为他很热心的这样讲哈，他很热心的跟我们分享了很多没有预料到他会回答的事情，对啊，所以时间才会比想象中长。好啊，现在就
好了，这样我们再录一个开场，就放一下吧。
有史以来最伟大的吉他手，吉他巫师 Steve Vai Inviolate 世界巡回台湾站，10月7日新北 Zep New Taipei，10月13日高雄 Live Warehouse 大库，见证 Steve Vai 专属 Hydra 吉他首次在台亮相，购票请洽 KKTix。